Chapter 14. In the great plateau's silken grasses, a lone fox tucked into its tail, satisfied with the peace he'd secured in nightfall. Link watched its plush fur fold into the waving underbrush as it settled, unaware of his presence as he crouched beneath a crumbling pillar mere yards behind. He pulled his bow taut, soundless even to his own ears. The Shika Rapspaye had blessed him with vanished his presence from the air. His footsteps, his breath, his heartbeat, all undetectable in her most sacred shroud. He was a ghost. His arrow pierced through the creature's brow, right between its shuttered eyes, too quick and too stealthy for any reaction before its life was snuffed. He scanned the abandoned ruins and respiratory line for any shuddering, any sign that he wasn't alone. As the quartet of fugitives predicted, the ground was no longer safe for any of them. They planned visits to the surface after days of watching the patterns of patrols, Pura creating a detailed schematic for all of the pathways they could glimpse from their distant vista. She charted the ways the Verena and Yiga switched off, with the former bound to march in exact, regimented formation, and the latter prone to sneak off into abandoned camps or enclaves left behind by the rapidly vanishing monsters. On this first such mission, Link had dropped behind the riverside stable, an inn and gathering post he'd visited 1,000 times before, even after his mission in the upheaval. So familiar that the other horses would whine and become irritable when Epona was absent, and the innkeepers strived to keep the nice Malenia bed open should Link and his companion come by, although such treatment mortified him. Nevertheless, aside from his own home, it was the place he felt comfortable enough to take off his boots and sword and simply sit at the fire without scanning above it, at least for a few minutes more than normal. When Embru the innkeeper glimpsed his cerulean eyes between the wraps, all hues drained from his face.
"I didn't see you,"
he said, sliding a crumpled handful of thin paper across the counter before yanking the partition down at the window. His heart sank as he retreated back into the shade of the trees, unfolding the latest issue of the Lucky Clover Gazette. The black and white, smudged image of Zelda gave him a start, a first glimpse of the princess in the after, blurred and too worn now to so much as make out the expression on her face. She was seated and posed, maybe in the library? Background fireplace flames lent the shot its light. Dark layers of fabric cascaded from her forearms to pool around her feet, evoking the ultimate Empress version of the Verena uniforms. Thick fingers creased the silk at her shoulder, Ganondorf's grip powerful enough to pulsate even through the worn, discarded image. He'd been fitted with an impressive crown, though otherwise looked exactly as Link remembered him from the lair beyond the Forgotten Foundation. The hilt of the same gloom sword fitted at his side, the Gerudo fabric draping at his hips. Pura and Paye had tried to warn him about this, in waves of tender caution and blunt explanation.
"He knows that Zelda is the most powerful weapon he will ever have against you,"
Pura reiterated as Link sat on the edge of the island that morning, examining the stitching in his old paraglider. How it was still in his tunic pack was a mystery, one he could only owe to the fact that some version of himself knew he'd need it again. His old life was an inevitability.
"Whatever she's enduring right now, you can't let it be in vain, all right? Don't let pride get in the way of truly helping her. He knows he can't break her while you're still alive, but that's only if you're still alive."
He nodded, keeping his focus on the integrity of his equipment, hearing her sigh a bit before moving away and letting him prepare in peace. He wasn't an idiot. He'd seen the delight gleaming in Ganondorf's eyes as he beheld her in their bed, her golden hair splayed out in waves around the pillow like sunrays, the loose and worn gauze nightgown slipping down her shoulder, leering like a wild dog spotting its next meal. The way he reached for her tender cheek, as if the waiting master sword, the only blade powerful enough to part his flesh and seal him into another dimension's prison, was inconsequential. A risk worth taking for the reward. Her body contained multitudes of promise for his dark design, not only the surest way to draw Link out from the kingdom's underbrush, but a delight to behold, fizzing with possibility. Up until that night behind the stable, despite logically grasping the contrary, he entertained fantasies that the Demon King would, for one reason or another, lock Zelda away, alone, cornered off safely in her study tower, or even in the dreaded castle lockup. preserved as bait for their impending showdown. As awful as the solitude might be for the time, at least she'd be away from his clutches. For her safety, he told himself, a lie he half-heartedly accepted. Reading the printed story, despair yawned open in his stomach, swallowing him whole. How utterly stupid! Imagining her as some fairy tale maiden, not so much human as virtue with a pulse. Of course Ganondorf had taken her as his queen the nanosecond he had the opportunity. Of course she was walking around in the light of the palace, granting interviews to the Lucky Clover Gazette. Of course she would indulge his every whim, if it bought him time to return. Of course she would obey. Of course. And yet, the image made him retch into the bushes, dry heaving as bile sloshed down low in his gut. Drifting mindlessly above Hyrule for 10,000 years was one torture. Hedging herself between the lust of a monster and the good of the kingdom was another altogether. A slow, grinding, dehumanizing torture. Zelda. The infuriating, stubborn, measured woman her unfamiliars called a goddess, because relegating her as unknowably divine was much, much easier than having to actually see her. To sit through her moods and silences because she was reeling off a new discovery or obsession. To endure her obliviousness for how stupid she could make you feel because she was perpetually running possibilities to their inevitable conclusions, leaving you behind in the dust until she told you on no uncertain terms how you must proceed no matter how you disagreed. And there was no argument because when she handed you the thread, all you could do was trace it back and see that she was exactly right. The girl who'd made his life hell for a span of years that fate robbed him of remembering, but she filled in honestly. Yes, she resented his purpose, the way he fleshed out the role of protector without question or complication while she flailed around her destiny, as the kingdom watched and snickered, an age long forgotten now, as each era seems to be. How quickly her loyal subjects divert and move on with the freshest directive. But she would still die for them, endure anything if it meant they could go about their placid lives in peace. That impressionable nature of the public fanned his panic as he read this absurd story, one that he was sure Zelda detested. She did. Didn't she? Obviously she was under duress when she spoke, if it was her actually speaking at all. Certainly, because Ganondorf didn't have the power to manipulate her mind. Did he? There was no way he could twist her maddening, unshakable will. It was a force of light and time. But he couldn't know. There was no way to tell the truth of what was happening within the walls of her estranged home turned prison. He had no idea if she was being treated with any fraction of kindness, or whether she was hurt or how. Truly, she might be suffering. Goddess is willing he could save her, but he was powerless to stop the meanwhile hurt. Satisfied that the great plateau was the unoccupied shell he'd long known, Link crept forward along its edges, dashing from moss-coated column to dilapidated arch until finally reaching the Temple of Time's sinking steps. The saturated concrete gave way beneath his feet, leaving a trail of soft footprints up to the archway. There was something unnerving about this almost forgotten place, making him feel particularly conscious of his presence within it. A sense that this was hallowed ground he had no place within, and yet seemed as familiar as his own heartbeat. The haunting sense of being here before, like a waking dream. The force of this pull, down into memories that were not his own, was suffocating, and he rushed to the far end of the temple, where the serene and kindly goddess statue stood, eternally smiling, embodying the peace she could only hope to inspire in the follies of each generation. He knelt in the grass which had once been floor, dampening his knees with the midnight dew. With a deep breath, he closed his eyes, letting his lungs fill and then release, working up the nerve to speak. Prayer was not his strong suit.
Goddess Hylia, the mother of Hyrule, please hear my plea for your land and its heart,
he said, the words clamping up in his throat, welling up against emotion that threatened to overtake him.
Your daughter, Princess Zelda, is in great danger, and with her, your kingdom as well. I come to you, begging for the power to save her.
Warmth streamed across his scarcely exposed face, a beacon of grace as gentle as spring meadow sun. He looked up to see the immense goddess statue awaken, alight with an orbit of fireflies and her own inner radiance beckoning his attention. Our hero of peace, Math. The words rose in his mind from his core, like a parent's counsel etched into memory. Tell me of this threat.
The Demon King was resurrected from the sacred realm. His army stole Princess Zelda and stormed the castle. He now sits on Hyrule's throne, with the princess.
He stumbled, unsure of how to explain this disgrace to the divine.
Princess Zelda has been forced to serve as his queen. His power has only grown while ours has diminished.
The presence stirred within him for an instant, absorbing his news. I wish to help you, sweet protector, for dearest princess. He feared he would collapse forward and swiftly braced himself against the ground. So great was this relief of the goddess's favor. However, the light's embrace faded from his skin, dimming to dust in the air as quickly as the power in Zelda's palm. All things in this land, the sky above, the depths below, the castle north, the desert south, must be in balance. This is not a choice I can make alone. Seek out the brethren below. Only our favor together can bring the blessing you seek. Just as quickly as her spirit had embraced him, it departed. Her afterglow faded as stars in the dawn. He slid forward, gravity pulling him down to the earth, where the damp and the dirt and his tears were indistinguishable from one another. End of chapter.